Okay. All right, this is perfect. Yeah. So this is made in response to a friend of mine um by the name of Fifi. She recently made a YouTube video which is called One Take, and it speaks about, hold on, let me like bring it up here. I need to find it real quick. Hold up. Kind of losing my train of thought. You know me. One thing about me, I will lose my train of thought. Shim. History. There we go. The industry won't wait. AI already moved on, right? So, they discuss a lot of different topics, but it's all through the context of like the film industry. So, okay, cat's out the bag. Everyone who was on the show makes films or works in the film industry in some form or fashion. So the one guy who, okay, I'm looking at, let me do this, bro. Let me actually bring it up so that when I explain, you guys can see what I'm looking at. How are we gonna do this? How are we gonna do this? Take a screenshot and then perfect. Okay, cool. So let me take the screenshot and then I'll just make the screenshot like hella big. Okay, cool. There's my screenshot. Let me bring it up here for you guys to see. What else? Some display capture image. There we go. Image. Perfect. Yeah, image. There you go. Image file. Where did my screenshots go? Screenshots are by the pictures. Damn, I got a lot of screenshots. Okay, perfect. Perfect. Oh yeah, because it's not gonna be the same size. Right. Right. Okay, so now it's perfect. So the purpose of my explanation, like I was saying, so this is a video in response to this video, which is made by my friends, which is also me segueing a future series that I'm gonna make where I interview my friends, because I find my friends are like very interesting. Like I know a lot of like really interesting homies and just people. Not all of them are like my friends, but we're acquainted enough that I think I could ask them to do this, or at least I'd like to believe I could ask them to do this. And I'm pretty much gonna interview them because I find all the things they do very interesting. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's crazy. But anyway, now to start over from scratch. This video, which I wasn't even planning on making this video, but it's actually about, like I said, my friend Fifi, who was on a panel discussing aspects of the film industry and like things that are going on, and she had people around her who also work in the film industry. So the guy on the far left, I don't know him personally, but I once met the guy. So he has like this like warehouse, and like they like rent camera equipment, and like if you need like film stuff or whatever, they like rent it out and stuff. So anyway, cool, that's that, right? And then they like, yeah, they were discussing like different aspects of like film as a genre and da 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 da. So right now, I guess I'm gonna try to get into the questions I had. So one of the jumping points, because after talking to my friend, I told her, this is Fifi, by the way. I told her that she was saying that if I have questions, I can like ask away, and like, you know, she can use them as a jumping point for the next episode. Right. So this would be a great jumping point. You guys mentioned innovation and how you do need some dreamers, but then in the same sense, the final sentiment, ironically, was speaking on how you should also basically contribute to the status quo in terms of like what you're pitching with like ideas for things you want to do on TV. This was when y'all were talking about like trash TV and how people look down upon it, but like, you know, people are eating off that, and talking about how it does serve a purpose in like, in terms of like what it shows about things that go on in our country, which I do agree with. And I do find that like an answer to the innovation question is ironically also kind of caked into other things that y'all touched on. So like the acquisition of Canal Plus with MultiChoice, right? So with that acquisition, I'm like, okay, if you look at like how MultiChoice was back in the day, as far as like what you could get, MultiChoice was like you could watch not Yizo Yizo, but you could watch Yizo Yizo, but you could also watch I forgot what's the name of the show. There's this other show that has, you know the show. It has these three brews that stay in a hostel. The one's a Zulu brew, the one's a Sotho brew, and the other one is like this other brew that says, as far as I'm concerned. That's his catchphrase. He's like, as far as I'm concerned. And he does this with his hands. Or something like that, to that effect. You know the show I'm talking about. So you could watch that. You could watch Soul Buddies. But at the same time, you could watch Swordfish. Or you could watch The Matrix with Keanu Reeves on Mnet. You had all that and still, right? So how does this, you're probably asking yourself, how does this go back to the conversation of like innovation? It's right there, right? I kind of feel like the options of what we can watch, or in terms of what's being pushed out to us, feels like it's kind of evolving backwards. Like if you think of what MultiChoice was in itself, it's like you have a bunch of different things you could watch, right? There was a bunch of different things you could watch, but it wasn't like segmented the way things are segmented nowadays. Like, you know how like nowadays it's like you have film and series and like, let's say, cartoons and anime as its own thing, right? That's like what's on Netflix. But then it has like documentaries, but then it doesn't have like, for example, like normal like news. But that's something that you had on MultiChoice. On MultiChoice, it's like you could have all of that, and then you could still be like, all right, let me go to like ENCA and watch like the news, like normal, just straight up news. You know what I mean? Not someone re-breaking it down, or not someone examining, you know, something that's happening in the world through the lens of a documentary, like what you'll see on Netflix. I'm talking about just straight up news. That's what you had. Right. And then you had like a plethora of other explored channels, whether it be like channels that have religious content and smaller scale channels that y'all kind of briefly touched on with Mzansi Wetu, Lokshin Baiskop. You have that as well. Right. So, by the way, all of the stuff I'm saying, I guess take it somewhat with a grain of salt, because I'm not like, I ain't go to film school. Like, I ain't no film, like, I don't make movies or none. I just watch like a lot of TV. I just consume a lot of media. And I do think it's also important to also weigh in and have an opinion of someone that's outside of that. This is actually going to be my thread and my segue for my argument for, what is this called? When y'all mentioned the SAFTAs and like, are they still relevant today? And this goes back to the MultiChoice thing. I'm cooking. Anyway, so I think you get what I was getting at with like the MultiChoice thing and like the plethora of options that you had. And now it feels like with how y'all ended off, it comes off like, even when you look at like, I guess what's being made somewhat, it is, I guess, more segmented more than ever. So hopefully with this Canal Plus acquisition, we can have it go back to where you could get everything all in one conducive package, as opposed to it being segmented. Now between like, either I can just watch movies, or I have to watch the news, but then I don't get the movies in the same, you know what I mean? I think that's what made it like accessible, or some of these things relevant, right? So talking about SAFTA relevance, and I think you could argue it's the same case for like all kinds of like award shows, Metros, Oscars, whatever, right? So I would argue that when it comes to the SAFTAs, it might have been more relevant back in the day, because if you were watching, like, maybe if it was on MultiChoice, I don't know if SAFTA was like ever on MultiChoice, but if you could ever watch that on MultiChoice and DSTV, I would like to think that because that was all you could watch, it was more likely that you would end up like bumping into it. You know how like that's also something that people don't think about nowadays, is how before there was things you used to just bump into, or things you would just catch that were like, that's not really why I came to this channel. I wasn't looking for this. I was looking for something else, but I found something else that I'd also like to check out. And award shows, I think, is like one of those things. I find that it's like, it's probably because it was there that, like, oh, you see that there's, I don't know, an award show there and it's airing, and you're like, okay, let me check it out because, like, whatever, it's there. And then the movie that I want to watch is gonna play after. You see where I'm going with this? So anyway, now that you don't have that nowadays, it's like, you know, obviously you could just watch what you want to watch. Like you could just be a brew that just watches series, or you could just watch anime and never interact with series. Unlike before, where it was like you could still be a person that watches cartoons and whatever, but you could still bump into watching the news just by virtue of maybe you went to someone else's house and then by their house they watch like the news or whatever, and then it's like, oh, now I do have some semblance of knowing some of what's going on in the world. Maybe not first-hand accounts because I was going out of my way to look for it, but you get what I'm getting at. Right. So how does this go back to the conversation of innovation, right? So innovation, in my opinion, is like how it threads into like everything I've been kind of like laying up leading up to this, is like, the point is, back then you had different kinds of content and different even levels of content that you could consume all in one place. And I think it's important to still have that, in terms of how shows are pitched today. You know, an argument could be made. Even I thought of how, excuse me, when y'all were talking about pitching, you know, your shows, or when Tebogo was talking about pitching shows and them not getting picked up, I think it's also like an interesting segue for the argument for like Mzansi Wetu or even a Lokshin Bioscope, that like, why don't Bruce just pitch there? You know what I mean? Fine, they're not gonna take it there by Netflix and like Showmax. That's cool. Fine, they can keep it, but why don't you just apply it there? You know, why don't you pitch it there? But that's a whole nother conversation in itself. You know what I mean? Where it's like, it can be argued, like, do you really want to make the excuse me, do you really want to make the piece of media that you conceptualized, or is it purely a thing of you only want to make it based on how accurate it is to the way that you envisioned it? You get what I'm saying? Okay. So yeah. Now the second thing that I touched on was why the SAFTAs are not as crucial. You guys kind of answered it though. You mentioned how most of the categories you can't even vote for it as a normal person watching the movie, which also brings to the question, what is the point of even making the show or the movie if like the end user's not even in mind when it comes to like award shows? You get what I'm saying? It's like are you guys making it? It kind of touches, even y'all kind of touched on it briefly, that like, you know, did you just make the show for like to get the award, or you feel me? So yeah, it leaves more questions than answers, honestly. And then what's another thing that I could like pick apart in the whole conversation? Oh, difficulty. So again, Tebogo touched on like difficulty as like its own concept, and I had a way in that like it's more nuanced than people simply being lazy. So it's like is I think it's like, yeah, you could go on I'd argue for it's a case by case basis type of thing at that point. So it's like, okay, when you're in pursuit of this whole thing, and it's funny because I made a video about this yesterday, or a video that kind of threads and segues into this today. Ain't that crazy? We going back to talking about Solanin. Anyway, go check out Solanin, and then you'll see what I mean when it comes to like pursuing something and it not always having a guaranteed return on investment. So basically the gist of it is like, look, Solanin is just it's a movie about these two characters that were chasing their dreams, and like it didn't work out. But like life still moved on, and like it was cool. But it's like, it wasn't one of those things where it's like, yo, they chased their dreams and like everything worked out in the end. It was just like a thing. So when it comes to that conversation of like laziness, I'm like, you could argue for some people it's like that. Like for some people it's like, what if you had a situation like, okay, you just got into like varsity or whatever for like film school, and it took you a lot to get there and whatever, and you had your, I don't know, your one chance to like do it or whatever, and then like you blew it. Or maybe you just didn't have enough money to like sustain getting through the whole thing. You know what I mean? What about those conversations? Have you ever seen you should go check out a Netflix series called, I think it's called Losers or like something like that. But basically it's about like these stories of like athletes and whatever that like almost had their moment to like, you know, really excel and like break through, but it never came though. So like that's why I'm like, yeah, the whole thing of like being lazy, like it's way more nuanced than that. You know, like all of us know, Vele, that like hard work is not the only thing. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot of things that go into it. Like it's hard work, knowing what to do. Like everybody knows it's more nuanced. That's why I don't like that conversation of like saying it all comes down to like people just not being like, because it's people just not being willing to put in the work. Sometimes it's like you put in the work, but then it's like you also do need some return on investment. You know what I mean? Even y'all talked about it. Like, yo, like, you know, there needs to be a return on that investment. Like, I'm gonna need to see some bread relative to like the amount of effort that I'm putting in. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, cool. You can't eat on exposure and just, you know, trusting the process. Like, you niggas gotta eat. You know what I mean? Especially like when you get older. Like, yeah, sure. When you like, I don't know, 19 or whatever, you can still go with that type of push and like whatever. But it does get to a point where it's like, I'm gonna need a reasonable return. So at least a return enough that I can keep on doing it. Fine, I don't have to make a straight up profit, but at least let me break even for like, so I can continue to do the thing. But it's like, for some people, like that doesn't happen. And I feel like that's something that's not talked about enough. I think it's very easy and it's very like, yeah, it's just like a cop out to be like, all right, nah, you could just be like, yeah, you just don't want it bad enough. Even the young dude was talking about the same thing at the end. He was talking about how like, oh, like people have it easy nowadays and da-da. And I'm like, you know, when he used the analogy of like, he mentioned some about he talked about he mentioned there was this guy who had to go from Mpumalanga to like Jersey to go to school. And it's like, when it comes to stuff like that, it's like, you know, yes, I find with struggle, it's like, yes, it's somewhat relative to like your standpoint, but it's like, as an individual, I am of the argument that like, just because things are harder for you in your world does not mean things are easier for me. It's like, yes, if I'm looking at you and what's going on with you, I can say it's easier relative to where you're standing. You feel me? But it's like, for me, it's like, yo, I might stay closer to Joburg, but it's like, it doesn't mean me having to ask my mom for a clip or whatever is any easier for me. You feel me? It's just different degrees of difficulty. But I'd argue that there is no objective like measure for like difficulty. You know, even with like I don't know, having cameras that do more and whatever, I'm like, everyone experiences difficulty. It's like, you know, if you're talking about, my OGs had it harder in their times, it's like, yeah, but you know, they had it hard too. So it's like everybody has it hard. You know what I mean? But like, I don't know, whatever. That is that. And then there was like, a couple of other things, but I think for the most part, yeah. I think for the most part, that's kind of what I wanted to touch on. And then, okay, so I don't think I really expanded on the innovation thing and how you can use it as a jumping point for your next episode. So, I think your contribution, Fifi, was good because, you're somewhat of like an outsider, even in terms of like what you consume. You mentioned how, you know, I'm not super tapped in with everything. And I think that is important for the sake of like innovation, is like bringing a perspective of like, what's it like for a consumer who doesn't have multi-choice today? You know what I mean? What does content consumption look for someone like that? Or what does their vision of like what they could bring to the table look like? You know, I think it also is important, like what y'all said when you talk about like researching like something you want to make. Like, ain't no way you gonna write a telenovela, but like you don't even watch telenovelas. You know what I mean? I think that's sensible. I did have my own like thing of like, wait, what? That don't make sense. But then I thought about it and I'm like, nah, that makes sense. You know what I mean? That definitely makes sense to appeal to like the sensibilities of your target market. that like of course you got to start watching some telenovelas, or even if you just start watching telenovelas for that time that you're getting ready to make the thing. You know what I mean? And like, yeah, I don't think there's any more to that. So I think that is something that I'd like to hear you talk about, you know, because I think it also has the threads to that failure thing I was talking about and how like nuanced it is. Because you know, you know what you've been getting up to. You know, I ain't gonna lay it all down here or whatever, but you know, you've had your podcast episodes of things that you've tried in the past that like didn't work. So I feel like you're someone that can at least hold weight. I can't hold weight because, you know what I mean, I don't know everyone else on the panel like that, so everything I say is just gonna be like, who the hell is this guy? You know what I mean? But if you say it, it'll you know what I mean? They'll hear what you gotta say about it. So I think that like as far as like failure is concerned, I think that's something to speak to as well, because I feel like not enough people interrogate that as well in pursuit of like all the things that we see when people talk about their pursuit of like whatever they want to do in different disciplines in the industry. Like a lot of times it's like you only hear the winner's perspective, but you don't hear the perspective of someone that's like, yo, I didn't make it, but it's not even necessarily on some like I was blackballed by the, you know, it's not on that type of time where it's like on some I got blackballed by the industry or like whatever. Nah, I'm talking about like where they give you like a real perspective of like, okay, you know what I mean? Like this is like experience of like failure, and like I don't think enough people spend enough time talking about failure, and I don't think it's necessarily even a thing of like necessarily trying to bring more failure just by speaking of it or whatever. We're just talking about, you know, because even y'all even mentioned like how something like going to film school is like a gamble. If you had to tell the parents, you'd be like, "Yo, dog, this is a gamble." You know what I mean? So it's like why do we never discuss more of that whole thing of the gamble? I think that is something I'll probably make a video on its own about this, because it's also something I kind of alluded to in a video, the first video that I made in this like his series, if you want to call it that. But like, yeah, it's something that I kind of touched on briefly. Well, I didn't actually mention the gamble, but it's something that I like subtextually was getting or hinted at. This idea of like the big gamble and everything associated with it, man. You know, especially like, you know, what happens if it doesn't work out? You know what I mean? What does that look like? You know what I mean? Because even me, I know some brews that went to like film school and they were talking about, yeah, I'm a write a book, I'm gonna do this, and it's like, where the book at? If you ever get to see this, you know yourself. I ain't gonna say nothing. Feel me? But like, there's a bunch of, you know what I mean? I know some niggas that ain't eating right now, and you feel me? They be doing the film thing, so it's like, you know, but yeah, innovation is important. I do agree, and yeah, people need to empower themselves with more skills for sure. I definitely think that rang true, and I think that was a great jumping point. And I think yeah, next episode, a good jumping point for innovation specifically is talking about how MultiChoice already had the blueprint for the innovation, and now just discussing reintegrating everything so that it's complementary as opposed to being segmentary. That's not a word, but like, you get what I'm getting at. So just having it all together as opposed to like separated. Yeah, so there's my little essay about that. And then another thing I wanted to touch on, the AI thing. While I do think that, it I guess it depends on the application of the AI, but I know sometimes the issue that's had with AI is not even so much that it's AI itself, or at least for me. It's not necessarily the problem is with AI being AI. It's just the thing of like, I don't like that the AI has getting into it. It has that like that AI style. You know what I'm talking? You know how like when someone makes a picture and it's AI, like you can see because of the style, which is kind of ironic because it is original to the AI that like, yeah, this is the AI style, which is its own style. But it's like, if you think of real life, what you'd want to do in real life, or at least my approach when like making art and whatever, would be like, hey, how do I make a like, I want to take Picasso style, and I'm just using this as a reference for the point I'm trying to make. This is not, anyway, Picasso style painting, Basquiat painting, and fuse them into one, and then that's the painting that I want. But right now it's gotten to the point with AI where you can't ask it to do that. But as a real person, you could literally just go do that. You could just be like, all right, I'm just gonna study Picasso's work, Basquiat's work, and then I'm gonna put it together, and then boom. And fun fact, you know what you get if you put those two artists together? You know which South African artist you get? I ain't going. This is gonna stay private. You get Samurai Farai. You get Samurai Farai. Hold up. Nah, I ain't. Look it up. Look it up. Anyway, go look it up, and then you'll see what I mean. But yes, that is what you could talk about in the episode. Possibly failure and how nuanced it is based on your own personal experiences of the things that came before that you tried. Innovation and what that looks like given the blueprint that MultiChoice and even I'd argue the SABC already left for us. Blueprints, I don't even know too much about. I ain't even a film brew like that. I'm just going off of like secondhand knowledge that I just picked up from like around the way. And then what's the other thing? I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. Those are like the two things. So yeah. No questions, I guess. Just suggestions. Anyway, like, comment, even though the comments are turned off, and subscribe to the channel. This is gonna be left privately because I'm literally making this for like my friend. It's not for this one. I can't lie, but it's not for public consumption. But anyway, who knows? Maybe I might put it up if like, yeah, I don't know. But anyway, enjoy the rest of your day, bro.